Okay, so in this video, I'm going to briefly cover how to model each of the kind of surface types that are the geometric types that are listed here inside the CNC workshop. So we're going to go through these four types: the loft, sweep, the network surface, and Boolean. Before I do that, I'm just going to point out here are the rules. These are just important to pay attention to, and I'll show you how to implement this with surfaces. But the work area is, I'm sorry, the material that we're going to be cutting out of 7 inches, 2 inches deep, and the work area here is 6 by 6 by 1 inch. Now, what that means is that whatever surface we model has to fit within that 6 by 6 by 1, and we're gonna model a box to put that surface with. So in Rhino, first thing I'll do is change my units, check my unit, make sure I'm modeling in inches. The Rhino campaigner, that'll be separate. Okay, so what I want to do first is model that volume with 7 by 7. Typing in box, I'll just choose the origin, 0, 0 as my start point. 7 inches by 7 inches by 2. And I'm going to make one more box to subtract from that one. This time I'll choose the option center. And then I'll type in 6, 6 by 0.5. Because that's the excuse me. So you can see that even though our work area or our surface is 6 by 6 by 1, we want to leave a ½ inch below. That's going to be solid, so that's material we're not milling into. And then we're going to leave like an open space of a ½ inch above, because this thing is a mold, right? We need to leave some kind of space for the kind of concrete base. So then I'll take this volume, use the move command, and hit the option vertical. And then I'll just bring it down flush with the larger box. Use the command Boolean difference. So surfaces I want to subtract from, that's my overall box. Subtract with, that's my interior box. There we go. So now we've modeled the stock kind of volume that we're going to carve from, and the space we have to work in. So I'm just going to kind of really quickly go through the technique for each one of these. I don't want to give you a specific geometry. I'm just going to kind of show you roughly what I did with each one, how to use these 4 kind of basic modeling techniques. I'm going to switch onto another layer here. Go ahead and I'll call this one stock. Go ahead and lock that one. And the first thing I'll do is just model the loft. So what I'm going to start with is an arc from the top. So I'm going to model 180 degrees there. And all I did to generate the one that you're seeing is I copied this a few times. Also, and I would keep in mind you don't really need to kind of model precisely within that dimension. I would just, keep it loose, and I'll show you how to make sure it's fitting that dimension again. All I did was I took a kind of elliptical curve, copied it, and then I moved every other one up a certain dimension. Now, if I were being precise about this, I would move this curve up by 1 inch, right? Because that's our maximum workable area for our surface. And then I also want to make sure that I'm moving the curve by a particular increment. In other words, the spacing is somewhat even. So I could produce a line here and just quickly hit the project button. Copy that again. And move it. So I would uncheck project, hit the option vertical and move it back down. That's it. Then you basically just repeat the pattern. So I can copy these two curves relative to the first two over and over until I get a surface roughly large enough for my volume. And then I would use the loft command to select all the curves in the. So when you press enter and you get the loft options, a couple things to pay attention to here. Sorry. Something off really quick. So a couple things to pay attention to there when I type in loft. First of all is the style. You can kind of see that normal is going to kind of fill the surface through each of the curves. So the surface should actually be intersecting each of the curves, but you can also see it's kind of curved in the direction along that loft. If we look at loose, you can see it's going to fit those curves a little less closely. It's going to be a little bit more off. And I would also like to point out that at the beginning and the end, it'll always intersect with the curve. It's one reason you may want to copy this surface further, so that you can just cut a segment out of the middle. You get these weird anomalies at the beginning and the end. If we look at tight, it's going to be a little bit closer. It depends on your curves, really. And then I just want to point out one other thing, which is straight section. So in that case, we would get just like a series of, this is actually a poly surface, we would get a series of individual lofts in between each subsequent curve. So what I want is just to leave it on normal for now, just so you're aware of that. I am going to leave it on do not simplify, and I'll go ahead and click OK. And then I'm going to borrow a rectangle from here. Again, that's our 6x6. Changing the top view. What I'll do first is just move it so it's like centered on that surface. And then this is just like framing, right? I'm just trying to get that rectangle below. So I'm just trying to select an area of this surface that I kind of like. Again, I can scale this thing. However, I want to kind of capture more of the geometry or less. Again, these are decisions you'll kind of have to go back and forth on once you start to do RhinoCam, because when you start to produce, for example, like really tight gaps between surfaces, because of the nature of the tool, the bit won't really reach into those spaces, right? So you start to get, kind of less quality results. Okay, so if we trim away part of the surface, there's our little segment. Again, you can do any version of this that you want. Another one that I like is, in terms of loft, just to make two lines. About the width of your box, so 6 inches. And then just make a kind of zigzag like that. Join them, copy it, put one about every 1 inch. Again, we want to extend past the ends of our box. Don't get weird results on the end. And then take every other one and mirror it. Turn off the option to okay. And then if I were to loft these ones, for example, you can see if I leave it on normal, I get a pretty messy result there. Well, not messy, right? But I got a kind of weird surface in between those two. Whereas if I were to put it on loose, actually not even loose, I'm sorry, leave it on normal, but now we could use the option to rebuild those curves. And so down here when we choose rebuild, it's like using the rebuild command on each of these curves, and it's just going to show us what the resultant surface would be if we were to rebuild it with a certain number of control points, right? So we can start to see what that result looks like. That's another example of a lofted surface. Okay. And the last thing I want to point out here, I kind of delete everything but the surface, is with either one of these, if I'm, last thing I want to do is go ahead and make a bounding box around it. And then I can select both of those parts and go scale 1D. And then I can just ensure that the overall height of that geometry is 1 inch. For example, right there it was a little different. Again, scale 1D. And then we can go ahead and place that in our box. Use a new layer. Because I'll use them later when I do the RhinoCam setup. So again, we should have that sitting about in the middle of our box there, right? It shouldn't go below the bottom of the space we've carved out, and we should have about a ½ inch above form the kind of base when we cast. Right. Now I'm going to cover sweep 2 function. This one's really pretty similar. Go into a new layer here. With this one, I'm actually just going to model a box first really quick. So I have a kind of reference point, 6 by 6 by 1, remember. And with sweep 2, basically, it's kind of like loft, but you can generate curves to move through in both directions. What I'm going to do is switch into front view down here below, and I'm going to model basically just, I'll draw a line 1 inch long. I'm just going to model a kind of a wavy curve in this direction. Copy this over by 1 inch a few times. Yeah. Again, I'm going to go past the box so that I don't end up with weird results at the ends. And then I'll use the interpret curve command and just kind of draw a wavy curve through those lines. You can see once again this part of the curve is messed up, and this part of the curve is messed up because that's where the curve terminates, right? Well, what we can also do is delete everything we don't need, and then copy this guy a few times. Right. So now we have a basic curve, and I'll join those things. Delete all my lines. Join that guy together. Go back to top view here. Okay, so we're going to call this our cross-section curve. If you look at, say, some of the kind of, so sweep 2 kind of works like this. I don't know if you can see that. There's a, look at the red lines, those are what we call rail curves. And the purple lines are what we call cross-section curves. And so it'll basically take that cross-section and sweep it along those two rails to another cross. In this case, we're using two cross-sections. We can also just use one. But if we want to kind of transform it along its length, instead of just extruding the same shape along the path, we can use these rail curves. So, and that's what we're going to do here. So we're going to use this as our cross-section and also our sweep curve. So I'm going to go ahead and make a copy of this by just rotating. I'll hit the option copy. I'm going to snap to one of the endpoints there and copy it 90 degrees, rotate 90 degrees. And what we're going to do here is actually scale this by scale 1D. Scale this by 2. I'm just going to hit 2 without snapping to anything to scale it by a factor of 2. Copy that to either end. Again, you can do this with any set of curves. They don't have to be identical. They don't have to be aligned in a particular way. So I could flip these upside down, see what kind of results I get. But it is important that they're touching along the end there. And you can see with this, what's going to happen is my curve, my surface is going to be deeper than 1 inch. Sweep 1 or sweep 2, I mean. So just type in sweep and then the number 2. First rail, so these two are my rails. Oops. Then it'll ask for a cross section. And you can see it kind of produces a, it'll like carry that curve along that. Again, we'll have these options, and for the most part, we're going to leave it on do not change cross section. There's some reasons we may want to change it, but in this case, we don't. So again, if I were to do that, without flipping those curves, maybe it's something like that. Or we could put it so the high points intersect. Again, we can just take that segment, put these two, bring them. Right, so yeah, just go ahead and play around with that, see what you can produce. And oops, surface. So once again, go back into top view here. Let me make a rectangle that is 6. And we can kind of select which area of our surface we want to keep. Rest. And then I could choose bounding box. Scale 1D to make sure it's no more than 1 inch. Go ahead and place that in my box. Right. There's our sweep example. Now I'm going to move on to, which is the network surface. This one allows you to do kind of even more complex curves. So with this one, I'm just going to do a kind of freeform wavy curve, or what I meant to say was more complex surfaces. I'll do something like that. Again, we can just scale it to the right dimension afterwards. And then what I'm going to do is copy this curve 4 times. And again, you don't have to use the same curve. You can use 4 different curves. I'm using the command orient. I'll turn on the option to copy it. And then I'm just going to copy it all the way around. If you can get, what's important basically is that you get all the kind of curves to touch at 4 corners. So if you're using one curve, there is like a sequence you can use to get it to do that. So if you're using the same curve, even if the start and end point are at different heights, there's like a certain, there's a few different ways you can kind of arrange them so that they're touching at all 4 corners. But you can also just move the end point pretty much. So now I'm going to do a network surface command. So type in network surf, select curves in network. In this case, it doesn't matter too much what order you select them in, just select them all. And Rhino should kind of automatically sort out. Which curves? Or I'm sorry, what order to put them in. And you can see there it's kind of roughly making a kind of average surface between all 4 edges. So go ahead and click OK. Here we have the network surface. And so that one, if you're kind of precise about what edges you use, you can make all very precise geometry in the center of it. And once again, we're just going to make a bounding box around the whole thing and scale it to what we want. In this case, I'll use scale 2D. Again, I'm in top view, so it's just going to scale in the XY dimension. Start from one corner, and then I'll type in 6. You can see there. You can see that it made it 6 inches in the X and Y dimension. Now I'll select it again. I'll scale 1D and scale it down. Before I delete that bounding box, again, I'm just going to move it. Do my volume there. There we go. That would be our network surface. And then I'm going to show you one last example, which I'm calling the Boolean. And with this one, you can really use any kind of solid. So over here on the left panel, we have the solid creation tool. And you can see there's a whole bunch of different types of shapes. There's spheres, cylinder, box, cone, truncated cone, pyramid. I would recommend you don't use the tube or the torus in this case. I'll try. Ellipsoid, which is like a squished sphere, or a paraboloid. I don't quite remember how this. So okay, that'll actually work for what we're doing here. So what you want to do is basically take a solid object. And you can see, for example, this one is not solid. The bottom is open, which is kind of cool because then we can use either side of it, right? Maybe use the concave side. But with most of these shapes, they will by default create a solid. You can see the bottom is capped there. We actually don't need that. So if you wanted to use the inside of the cone, for example, you would just explode that. Delete the cap at the bottom. But all we're going to do here is just kind of simply copy this around randomly. And I'm going to scale it. So using the gumball and holding shift. It doesn't matter. They're the same size or depth. Again, just scale them to. You can even do that if you wanted, right? Move them up and down. These. What we're looking for here is just like a. Actually, I'm sorry. We actually don't want to scale them. We could, but that's going to make our lives a little bit harder. So what I'm going to do is actually just restart here. And we can scale them in X and Y, but we want the tops to be all intersecting. So, looking for is for that edge to be touching. Make like a few different sizes here. Okay, and then I'm just going to. And then again, I'm going to make my rectangle. There. So now we can color so it's. And so what we want to make sure that these joints here, so in other words, we don't want to have any part of the rectangle outside of where there's geometry. We want to make sure that those points where it comes in, if we're looking at the outside kind of outline of this geometry, isn't going past where our square is. And so once we have that, we're happy with how it's framed. I'm just going to type in trim. Okay. See there. So now we've trimmed away the outside within a certain volume. So you'll notice, and this is because of how Rhino works, when it makes a sphere or a kind of closed shape out of a single surface, there's always going to be a seam. So for example, when I make a sphere, see that edge right there? Basically, this is one surface that's wrapping all the way around and closing along the seam. That's how Rhino kind of sees it. So when you trim surfaces in certain ways, or when you trim a surface kind of through the seam, it'll actually become two surfaces. So just watch out for that. You'll have to trim both of those. But now we're going to go through and just kind of trim all these edges by their intersection, by where they intersect with the adjacent shapes. Start with this guy. I'm going to type in the command split, and then I'll select all three of those kind of cones that intersect it. Press enter. Now you can see it should have made like a cleaved edge, and without deselecting or without clicking, I'm going to hold Control on the keyboard and deselect just the kind of inside of the dish. And now you can see I have all those kind of tabs out there still selected, and then I'll type in delete, which is just a kind of slightly faster way of trimming without having to go through and find a little segment that I need to trim. So I'll do that with each one of these splits. Select all the cones that intersect it, deselect the center, and delete. Split, select, deselect, and delete. Yeah, right there, you want to watch out for that kind of thing. There you go. You have that kind of, soap bubble type of geometry there. Then we can select all those, join them. Again, make a bounding box. Select both the bounding box and the geometry, scale 1D. Scale it down to 1 inch. Go ahead and place that in my box. So now we have an example of each of those 4 surfaces. I'm going to sign off on this video here. You'll see that in the assignment, the next couple of things to do will be there will be a RhinoCam setup video, which will be the same for everyone. And then there will be 4 separate videos of each of the types of toolpath here. Again, they don't need to correspond to the geometry that they're corresponding to down here. You can try any and every toolpath with any and every geometry that you create. Just up to you, kind of what effect you're trying to get in terms of carving that surface. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off, and then the next video to watch will be the RhinoCam initial setup.